Guys, have you ever found yourself stuck in your relationship where things are not working and you don't really know why? Maybe you're not in a relationship and you want to be in one, or maybe you are in a relationship but it's not really working and you've lost your way. Today, we're going to be unpacking how we men get unstuck. Well, how we get stuck and how we get unstuck, and with the insights from men's coach Faisal Khokur, who helps men with attraction, dating, and masculinity. So, firstly, Faisal, great to see you again and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, let's jump straight in. So let's talk about the problem first of all. So what people, men listening to this, or maybe even women as well, thinking about their partners, what does it look like typically for men in your experience when we're getting it wrong? What kind of issues do we run into, please?
Oh, where do we start from here? Um, Usually, the guys that I work with, where they stuck, where they really get it wrong, is when it comes to understanding women, understanding relationships, and then at the deeper level, it goes down to understanding themselves. And so, what happens is that they end up getting really confused. Uh, they might think, well, okay, I'm a guy, she's a girl, and they're all supposed to work out. And they usually guys are going, well, I can't build attraction with the girls I want, or the girls I don't want. I have a lot of attraction or connection with, and she wants me. And when they do get into a relationship, and then they start all these, I call them fractures, all these traumas, all these problems, all these issues start to emerge. And then they are like, okay, where did this come from? I've never dealt with this. So yeah, there's a lot of things that start to show up.
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to hearing about the fractures. I know this is your conception of like how these issues show up.
It
But
is.
let's just before we jump into those, I'm really looking forward to that. But before we do, let's say I'm one of those men having those kind of issues where my relationship's not really working. How do the symptoms tend to start to reveal themselves when I'm having these challenges?
It's. I'll tell you more about the way it stemmed from me because one of the things that I found difficult in relationships, and I see a lot of guys have this as well, is that they're people pleasers. Right? So we call them the nice guys, or as Dr. Glover called them, the nice guy syndrome. So these people pleasers, they go out, they have to be really nice, pleasant. They don't want to create any animosity, and it comes with good intentions. But what happens is when that comes with those intentions, what they're doing is they're also doing some approval seeking behaviors. So they may have good intentions, but behind the scenes what they're doing is they don't want to be unliked. They don't want to be they don't want the woman to be upset with him. They don't want her disapproval. So what he'll do is he'll do anything to make her happy, but in trying to make her happy, he does the opposite.
I see. That's such a fascinating point. I've come across this phenomenon. Would you say, Faisal, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Would you say that when we're suffering in this phenomenon, would you say it can be quite confusing in a respect? Because it's like we're doing the things that seem to make sense, obviously pleasing your partner, keeping her happy, but nevertheless it's just not working. What do you think? Does it quite often come with this level of confusion, would you say?
Well, yeah, because I don't know about you, Matt, but when I grew up, I heard this narrative: happy wife, happy life, right? So it was whatever you want, right? The yes man. And on paper, it kind of sounds good, doesn't it? It sounds good. You're this yes guy. There's no trouble with you. You're not challenging. You're not a problem. You're this guy who gives her everything she wants. But she's unhappy. She's unsatisfied with this guy who just gives her everything, the yes man. And the results speak for themselves. So, one of the ways that I help guys to understand something, and myself as well, why am I doing something and it's not getting the same results? And then on the other side, you probably see this, Matt, is there's bad boys mistreating women, and the women are all over him, over her. And that's so confusing. And it's like, well, he's not respectful to her. He doesn't treat her well. And then she's really into him. So there's a lot of confusion going on here.
Yeah, it makes sense. And because I guess when the good guys or nice guys look at those kind of men, they think, well, how could that ever be good for your relationship to be like challenging and toxic, maybe even abusive? You look at that and say, well, I definitely don't want to be that person. So then it's like a conundrum, isn't it? It's like if what we're doing isn't working and we don't want to be that toxic macho guy either, what's the answer?
That's the thing, and that's where this is where I was confused. I don't know about your journey, but this is where I was confused. I'm like, okay, I'm doing everything I can to make. So when I was married for nearly 10 years, and I did everything I could in the relationship. I was a good provider. I'd made sure everything's provided. I covered all the bases. So, for example, good home, good job. I had my business at that time. And I'm thinking, what else does she want? Right? We go on holidays, we go to these places. Why is she not happy? What is it? And it wasn't just my ex-wife, it was just like the relationships after as well. I'm like, what's going on? I don't get it.
Definitely, no, completely resonate a lot with that. What you just described, Faisal, in my previous long-term relationship, it was a very unhappy relationship. And on the face of it, I would have looked at myself and thought, well, I'm doing most of the things that I'm expected to do here. So why am I so miserable? Why isn't it working? Why is she always on my back? Why? Yeah, it was a very, very difficult place to be and confusing. That's the really word that resonated for me. That I just didn't recognize myself as like, I wasn't like a horrible, abusive individual, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, the relationship was a disaster. So what to do? So it sounds like we're on the same page, and yeah, experience resonates there a bit. So yeah, fantastic. Well, shall we get into, well, before we jump into the first of the five fractures, do you want to just explain like how you formulated this? What was your inspiration in this model that you've created?
Yeah, it's so my background was computer science, right? So I love logical thinking. Everything's got to make sense. Typical, I would say, for most men, is that I have black and white thinking. It's either this way or that way. So my computer scientific mind looked at this problem of relationship. So I went through a really, I would say, painful divorce. I didn't see it coming. She instigated the divorce, and I think majority of divorces, I think 70% or something like that, depending on where you are instigated by women. So I went through this journey. She instigated the divorce. I was devastated, and after that journey, I went through. I call it my awakening. As I say, the universe has shaken you to awaken you. So I went through this awakening, and I had to look at myself. And even though I was this nice guy, but behind the scenes, it wasn't always nice because there was a lot of insecurities. There was a lot of neediness. There was a lot of pleasing to get my needs met. There was something else that I didn't realize. There was a lot of anxiety behind the scenes that I didn't recognize myself as an anxious man. But the symptoms of that was anxious because I always wanted certainty. Everything had to be okay. And anytime she's upset, it had to be okay. So after the divorce, what I realized was there was a lot of some challenges I found in myself. Uh, as as a as most men, I didn't want to confront it at first. I didn't want to. I took 100% ownership of it, but there was a lot of dark stuff that came out. I was like, ugh, this is ugly, and because of that, I went through this dark space, and then I realized I need to work on this. And I did a lot of self development. I went to every seminar and then I hired some therapists, hired some coaches. And after a little while, it was quite overwhelming. And after realizing this, then uh, after getting a lot of help, then I realized that there was people needing my help. Because when I was talking about, okay, this is what's wrong in your relationship, this is what's wrong in your relationship, a friend of mine said, why don't you become a coach? And I'm like, I'm not a coach. She said, come and let's do some stuff. So we ended up doing some talks, and from there, as to say, the purpose chose me rather than I chose the purpose. And then I realized that it was really confusing. So what I did was I broke it down into 5 segments to help me digest the areas I need to work on. And then I just presented that to the guys and said, look, these are the 5 areas you need to work on to have a complete life which is happy, fulfilling, empowering. And as guys, we like boxes. Everyone does, but I like boxes. I just need to compartmentalize them. So I just put them in 5 simple boxes, and I thought, okay, this is a great way to approach this.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing your creation and how you've broken this down, Faisal. So these are, as I understand them, the 5 areas that we men need to be conscious of and be working in to give
Yeah.
ourselves the best possible chance of having a great relationship. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So there's 5 areas that the guys really struggle in. So a lot of men struggle this. I call these the 5 masculine fractures. I mean, there are 5 fractures that can apply to men and women and even children. And what I've done is I've just broke it down, and I'm focusing on guys, just helping a lot of men, because I know that there's a lot of help and support for women, but there's not enough support and guidance for men, especially now. But it's getting better. It's getting better, like having conversations like this.
Absolutely. There is an increasing awareness, isn't there, of this? I was at a seminar earlier in the week, which was about relationships, and probably, well, over 90% of people in the room were women. And the flavor of the whole thing had quite a feminine style. And I was just thinking to myself, like,
Mm.
these women are here showing up and trying to work on this stuff, but what about the guys? What's really out there for them? So let's put this conversation out there and just say this is an offering, some ideas for us men that are looking to show up in a great place, but in a more masculine style.
You make a really good point. And this is something that I struggle with, and I see a lot of guys struggling with right now, is that the guys who pick up relationship books, self-development books, what I found, and what a lot of the guys I work with, I see, is they're following a lot of the feminine narrative of relationships. And when they follow the feminine version of the narrative, they're thinking, well, why isn't that working? Right? Because I did
Yeah.
that. I like you said, there's 90% women in the room, so it's targeted to the audiences. So I struggled when I was following the feminine narrative, and I was raised by my mom. I spent a lot of time around women, and because of that, I had what I call the feminine template of life, not the masculine. And because when a man has a feminine template of life, he does things in a way that a female would do. And when you have a man who's got a template of a female, and he's trying to date and attract a woman, it doesn't uh, blend. It doesn't attract.
So fascinating, isn't it? I completely agree. And it can be a bit deceptive because, interestingly, the person leading this seminar with all the women that I mentioned was a man, but he had a very interesting narrative around masculinity. He wasn't really pro masculine at all. He really saw the masculine as the problem. And so it's super confusing when even like the leading men in this space are talking about masculinity in a way that isn't really very empowering. And then you look around the room
Yeah,
and you say, well, is it that surprising that there aren't many men in the room? Because we're not exactly being made to feel good about ourselves.
yeah. And I could understand that as well, because when I went through this journey, I started to coach. Started coaching, I started coaching masculine and feminine, and most of my clients were women. So when I was reading about a lot of relationship stuff, I was learning the feminine narrative of things. So when that was fine for women to absorb that and apply that, but when guys were applying that, it didn't have the same result. Now, I'm not focused on, there's many ways to achieve a result. And what really matters is the result. That's my logical masculine kind of thinking is, am I getting the output? Am I getting the result? If I'm not getting the result, okay, so something needs to happen. We need to change the strategy, change some tactic, but we're not getting the desired results. And I think that's where, when guys are teaching to an audience of 90% female, they will get the desired result for the feminine, but not for the guys.
That's right. And then ultimately, if the women are showing up in a great state, but the guys just don't know what to do, or maybe they're trying to mimic what the women are doing, then there's
That's,
all kinds of
yeah.
challenges. Interesting. At this seminar, just to say a little word about this, there was a couple being coached live in the room in front of 300 people. And during the conversation, the guy was like in the crosshairs. He was being challenged a lot by this coach or therapist. And it turned coming in the conversation, it turned out this guy was a stay-at-home dad, which is like wonderful. I mean, can suit some guys, nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But then when you heard that his wife was the business owner out making the money, and then you feel the level of resentment that's built up between the two. It's worth just standing back and wondering really what's going on there. Again, there's absolutely nothing wrong with people expressing their life in any way that they want, but then if something's not working, it's just worth bringing these things into question, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, so true. Here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with doing these things as long as it's, within moral reasons and legal reasons. There's nothing wrong. What you have to understand as an adult is you will have consequences. So you might say, well, there's nothing wrong with being this. That's fine. But that action, if that has a consistent outcome that you don't like, then obviously that action is a problem then, because it's not getting the result you want. So here, I think a lot of logic and understand rational kind of like aspect needs to be applied here.
Definitely. Absolutely. Well, that's a nice overview. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in now, Faisal. So let's jump in, shall we, into the first masculine fracture?
Okay, so the first fractures, and these fractures, how are they created? Some are created because of your upbringing, some because of your society, parents, any kind of fractures or any kind of traumas that you might have experienced, but not all. And this is really important. I really want to iterate this. Not everything comes from your childhood, because I know in therapy it's like, let's go back to your parents, but not everything goes back there. So how I see the brain is the brain isn't new. It's very old. It's, Homo sapiens been around for like over 200,000 years. Language is only an add-on for 80,000 years ago, approximately that. So, and, there was different types of humans before. So we're like, the brain's been around for a long time. So there's a lot of software in there. And that software updates very slowly. Yeah, nowadays we get brand new phones every year, but we're talking about tens of thousands of years of our software evolving, and so we have a lot of these, I would call, bugs or dysfunctions in our software. So these fractures are highlighting some of the lack of development and growth, but also some of the, I would say, the data that goes in with some of the experiences that we've had during our childhood. So let's start with the first fracture. The first fracture is what I call the main fracture. It's the nerve fracture. And this is like your spine, right? So this is the spine. And I remember a lot of, it's quite embarrassing, but before I didn't really have a spine as a man. And how that showed up was whatever you want. What do you want? I don't know, whatever you want. So I didn't stand up for something. So I whenever there was pressure, I caved in. And so what I call the fracture is that a nerve fractured man fears uncertainty, right? And he believes he's unsafe and therefore is constantly seeking comfort. So can you imagine when you get a text message or you get a phone call or she says to you, honey, we need to talk, right? And like alarm bells are going off. And she said, but I can't talk right now. Let's do it when we get home. And you're like, I need to know now what's going on. What is this? So it's that uncertainty, is that drives us crazy. So we're looking for certainty. And we think that because it's uncertain, we're unsafe. And, and what we're looking for is soothing. We're looking for comfort. We need to soothe ourselves. Unfortunately, nowadays, we're soothing ourselves in very unhealthy ways. Social media, it could be food. I'm guilty of this as well. I love tasty food, and it's like a way of soothing myself. It could be gossip. It could be, repetitive stuff. So you're finding ways to soothe yourself. So that's the first one.
So yeah, so let me just play back. So what I'm hearing is it's about not having a spine or being not being clear enough about what we stand for. Is that a nice summary, Faisal?
Yeah, absolutely. But also it could be social anxiety. because a nerve fracture is like you can be social anxiety. A lot of guys are afraid, especially to approach attractive women, talk to them, so they'll miss out opportunities. Another way that nerve fracture really shows up, and this is quite a big problem actually, quite a challenge, is they lose their composure. So when things get hard, maybe you guys are having a conflict, he just loses his shit, or both of you lose your shit. So that's losing your composure, and in that moment, you become quite hypersensitive. So you're hypersensitive to tone, you're hypersensitive to their body language. So there's quite a bit going on in there. I mean, there's a whole list. I don't want to go through a lot of all of them, but there's things like impatience, impulsiveness, easily distracted. There's something I call the deaf response, where you end up defending yourself, excusing yourself, attacking or fawning. So this is all part of the nerve fracture.
Makes perfect
And
sense. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go on to the next one.
okay, the second one is the ego fracture. So the ego fractured man, he fears failure, like getting it wrong, doing something that won't be successful. So the ego fractured man fears failure. It's because he believes deep down, there's a core belief he's unworthy, right? And therefore he's constantly pursuing validation. He needs validation, attention, approval, and he's seeking power. So that's what an ego fracture does. And an ego fracture has really negative symptoms as well. So for the ego fracture, you're arrogant, boastful, or maybe you close down because you don't feel worthy enough, right? And also you're eager to prove yourself. You might also, because when your ego gets hurt, I call it like you have the spoiled brat reflex. You're like sulk, you're demanding, you're grudgeful, you act like a little brat.
I see.
And yeah, and there's
I
something
see.
else as well. When you have an ego fracture, you fear criticism. It's quite narcissistic. It's very self-absorbed.
I
So
see.
when
So it's
when the
like
person's
an unhealthy, something like an unhealthy view around the self, like either maybe over-grandizing the self or maybe feeling unworthy. Could it be either of those, Faisal?
yes, so you can oscillate between either of them. Yeah, because what you have is a fractured self-image. So what the ego fracture is, because it's fractured, it has a very fractured self-image. It sees itself as really unworthy, and so it'll compensate by either shutting down, closing off, approval-seeking behavior, looking for validation, or it'll just do the opposite, and then it'll become it'll have superiority complex. It'll just be like, I am the most amazing person in the world. Look at me, right? So what it's doing is still feeling inferior. The core belief is still inferior. I'm unworthy, but it can go either way.
I guess in either way, it's going to be challenging for the people around them to relate to that, isn't it? Either if someone is, you know, feeling really unworthy and need a lot of reassurance, or if they're overly grandiose and self-important, either way, that's going to
Yeah.
be quite a handful for the people around them.
Yeah, absolutely. They're fractured ego people are a nightmare to be around because they don't take any feedback. They hypersensitive to criticism. They're a perfectionist, right? They at work it might be that their imposter syndrome might kick in. They always they have a quite when it's fractured. They have a quite a scarcity mindset when it comes to guys, when it comes to women, when it comes to money, when it comes to opportunity. Uh, they're always self-doubting and have a self-negative view. So they're always hard on themselves. They have these limiting beliefs. And on the other side, it might just go the opposite way. Like, yeah, I can do anything. And then they realize they can't.
Okay, it makes sense. So it's all issues around like ego, worthiness, grandiosity. That all comes under the second one. Perfect.
Yes.
Excellent. Let's go on to the third one, shall we?
Right. So the third is the emotional fracture. So the emotional fractured man fears rejection, right? Because his belief is he's unlovable. And when he believes he's unlovable, he is constantly longing for connection, right? He wants to connect. He wants a relationship. He wants to be in a relationship. And this is not just the fractured man. This also can be the fractured woman as well. And what happens with the fractured man is that he ends up attracting and fusing or bonding with a fractured woman. So he wouldn't uh, bond with a secure woman, because a secure woman will see those fractures and reject that person. But the
See.
fractured, so the both fractured man will fuse with a fractured woman, or a fractured woman will fuse with a fractured man. So the emotional fracture, some of the, because there's a belief of I'm not lovable, it's very codependent, very needy. It
Mm.
needs that connection. And when a man has an emotional fracture, what he does is he makes the relationship the central part of his life. Like everything is all about the relationship. He'll be self-sacrificing. He'll sacrifice his own wants and needs and desires for the relationship. And I did this as well. I don't know if you've done this as well, Matt, but when I was a father, when I was in a relationship, I just like, I need to spend all my time with them. I need to really focus on the relationship. I ended up neglecting my needs and wants, neglecting my friends, my hobbies. And when the divorce came, uh, I was left with nothing. I was like, well, who am I? What do I want? What are my needs? What are my desires? Because I sacrificed so much for, you know, for the family, for the kids. And anytime I spent time or money on myself, there was this uh, guilt. There was a lot of guilt coming up. Well, actually, I should be spending more time with my kids, or I should be spending more time with the family and my wife. I should be, spending this money on them, not myself. So there was a lot of guilt, um, swimming around in that time.
Yeah, I definitely recognise that, Faisal, 100%. When a previous long-term relationship that was really struggling, there was a real lack of emotional connection, and that definitely had a cost on me over time. I think what I did sort of as a result of that. So at some point, it was definitely this longing for connection, wanting to be more bonded to somebody because my wife wasn't really interested in that. So I think after a
Mm.
while, I just closed down. I think that was then my pattern of dealing with that. I just went into my shell, and then it was like, well, I was there in body, but then not really fully present. I wasn't really there in my fullness. I was just there surviving. So yeah, I think I definitely resonate with that one a lot.
Yeah, and it's when you're there, you're longing for that connection, but also most men, they struggle to end the relationship because they don't want to experience that abandonment. I'll drag this relationship down as long as I can because my ego says I don't want to fail, right? So I'll just stay in this loveless, sexless, unhappy relationship, but I'm not failing. I'm still going to carry it on. And I don't know what to do. I might just keep doing the same thing and hoping for a different result. But whatever happens is I don't want to be abandoned. I don't want it to end.
There was definitely some of that for me, 100% Faisal. I think also that I don't know whether you've ever experienced this, but like the longer it went on, the harder it was to say it's not working, because it's almost like at that point that you admit failure, it's like you're not only admitting it at that point, you're also admitting that you've been holding on for years and years to something that was not working. And that's almost like for the
Yes.
ego, coming back to the previous one, it's almost like too much to digest, that sense of failure after years and years and years of trying. That's a tough place to
Yeah,
be.
it is. I've invested so much in it that it'd be wrong. It's what's that? Deep sunk
The
fallacy or
sunk
something like that.
sunk cost fallacy, exactly. You've sunk
Yeah,
the
that's
effort
it.
in. So
Yeah.
let's just hold
And
out a bit
also,
longer and hope something changes.
exactly. And also, I was embarrassed. There was a lot of shame and embarrassment around because when I came divorced, I remember I had this self-image of you're a failure. You lost your family, your wife. You know, I remember going to my son's school, and so I went to my son's school. I'm picking them up, and I just wanted to hide because I didn't want the other parents to see. Well, who are you? I've never seen you around before. Never seen these kids around before. And why isn't their mum picking them up? And why are you picking up? Oh, you're the guy who was divorced. So there was a lot of embarrassment about,
The
you
stigma.
failed as a, yeah, there was a lot of stigma around it. You failed as a man.
100%. And also, I don't know what your, well, yeah, for me, being no one in my family had ever got a divorce. I mean, that's not to say they all had amazing relationships, but they'd always stuck in there. But, it was just that sense of, am I going to take this uncharted path, that no one in my family has ever really gone down? And do I really want to be the first person in that respect? And I think I had a turning point there where I went from thinking, well, maybe this is what I need to do. Maybe if this is what's required to draw a line, then maybe I do need to take this uncharted path. And it requires a certain courage at that point, doesn't it? And I don't know about you. It sounds like you had some support, yourself, and I certainly had my own, because it's almost like it's a leap, isn't it? And I know that's where the work that you do and that we do comes in, where people may be unhappy, but they don't quite know what to do. And then you may just need some support to make sense of it, to decide what the right outcome is.
And that's the typical thing of most men. They don't ask for help because they think, hey, I don't want to read the manual, I can figure it all out. Right? So they internalize a lot of stuff and they say, well, I'm a problem solver. That's how my brain works. So I can fix problems. So I don't need to go and ask for help. I'll try to do it myself. And if I go and ask for help, this is what else happens in psychology. Very interesting. Is if I go ask for help, people will know my flaws. And when people will know that I'm flawed, I risk being embarrassed, shamed, ridiculed, judged, excluded. So the ego is trying to, paint this perfect picture. And a lot of couples and guys will do this. They're trying to paint a perfect picture of their relationship. You'll see them on Instagram, you'll see them on Facebook. But behind the scenes, there is something, sinister going on. There's something horrible going on. It's not the actual truth.
Mm.
And so the ego is trying to look good, right? It wants to look good in front of everybody. I've got my business in order. I've got my work in order. Look, I've got a beautiful wife and kids. But behind closed doors, it's a different story.
That's right. It's a great point. It's such a moment of opportunity, isn't it? Where we finally get to that point of saying, I just can't do this anymore. And, for anyone here listening, where you feel you may be at that point of things have maybe not been great for a while and you've just been trying to make some incremental changes, but maybe it's still not really working. I just invite any listeners in that place just to really ask a question like, am I willing to do this forever? Is what's going on right now going to serve me for the rest of my life? And I remember when my coach at the time asked me that question, it really hit home. And I thought, wow, that's such a great point. Am I really going to get old in this relationship? Is this going to be the relationship that defines my whole life? Or am I going to say that I can do better here and that I will do better? And I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make that change, whether it's in this relationship, great, or maybe it's not in this relationship, who knows? But either way, we've got that choice, don't we, as adults, how we want to navigate our relationship and navigate our life.
Yeah. So what made you reach out for help? What hurdle did you have to get over as well?
It took a while, yeah. So I got some coaching. It wasn't initially only really focused around relationships, but that was part of it. But what I took,
Right.
the opportunity I took when I set these goals around different aspects of my life, one area that I knew was like a big like fly in the ointment of my overall well-being was my relationship. Because I was doing great in some other areas, but my relationship definitely wasn't great. And I think I'd put it on the back burner and just thought, well, it'll hopefully improve on its own. But with this support that I got, what I found really helpful, and we do this in our program, it mirrors in what we do, maybe in what you do as well, I don't know, but we set a time frame and say, well, let's work on it for this period, go all out, do everything we can do, put the work in, and then at the end of that period, we'll know the answer, and maybe that ends up being an answer together with my partner, or maybe like in my case, it was an answer on my own. But either way, it's going to be an answer. And I think there's a sort of power in coming to that clarity of saying, look, this can't go on forever. This is a reasonable time to work on it for. And then beyond that, I'm going to be in a better place. Whether it's with this partner or not, I'm definitely going to be in a better place. And really making that a non-negotiable. So I think that support I got around that, Faisal, was really what helped me in my scenario to finally step up and do something about it. Because I'll be eternally grateful for that support that I got, because I could have been quite easily miserable for the rest of my life in that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's good to have that deadline. It's good to know, okay, here's a hard stop, because it moves us to action. Otherwise, we'll just keep repeating a cycle. will just keep going the same loop over and over again. And then, that's what, trauma is, trauma relief, trauma relief. You'll just keep forever going on that same cycle.
That's it. Exactly, Faisal. So, yeah, this stuff is super important. I love what we're covering here already. Yeah, well, let's get into the fourth fracture, shall we?
Okay, so the fourth fracture is the sexual fracture. So a sexually fractured man, he fears intimacy, right? Because there's an underlying belief that he's undesirable, right? So therefore, he's constantly craving passion. He wants passion in his life. But that sexually fractured man, what he does is instead of getting the passion from his relationships or relationship, he sexual desire, he will then resort to porn, paid services, having affairs, infidelity. So because he's not getting that at home or doesn't know how to access that, so he'll resort to unhealthy ways to, have those cravings.
I see. So, what I'm hearing, Faisal, because this part of him is not being fully expressed or fulfilled, maybe in the relationship, that it comes out in dysfunctional ways. Is that right? That the sexual energy, rather than being expressed in a loving relationship, it comes out in other ways.
Yeah, because first of all, a lot of guys, depending on culture as well, but a lot of guys will have a lot of sexual shame. It's not okay to talk about your sex. It's not okay to talk about your needs and wants and desires. So a lot of boys, I mean, I didn't have any kind of education apart from the sex education I had at school, which was, I can't even remember it. But there was no conversation I had with my father or, parents that said, what, this is about sex. This is, about relationships. Never had that relationship conversation. So there are a lot of needs and wants, and there's a lot of questions that young boys will have. And, I had a lot of questions as well, but I was too embarrassed, too shameful to ask them. So what happens is that those shame is then internalized. And then what happens is when you have those internalized shame, any kind of expression, sexual expression may be quite raw, and they might come out in very raw ways, and then there might be some negative repercussions of that. I remember at school, this is probably where it's gonna stem for a lot of guys. Is like, oh, you're a pervert. Oh, you got a hard on. Or you're disgusting, and you desire what? What do you like? So all of those, there's a lot of shaming that happens, and because of that shaming, when toxic shame develops, it just internalizes. And until toxic shame is healed, what we do is we externalize it in addictive ways. So, guys will be addicted to porn, addicted to masturbation, and they'll be stuck in that cycle. And, I find myself, I wouldn't say I was chronically addicted to it, but I did consume porn. I did need that gratification. And, over time, I developed techniques and ways to, get rid of my porn. So, I don't watch porn. I haven't watched it for years. I find it's a lot, much more. I find myself much more healthier place to be, and also, the women that I do date and I have relationships with, they find that a lot more fulfilling, because guys who are sexually connected to their own inner rawness are more sexually desirable. And also, most guys don't know how to seduce women, and seduction isn't a negative thing, but seduction it's a beautiful, I would say, journey, of tantalizing interest. Here's an example. Seduction is like really eating your food and soaking in every single flavor, the smell, the taste, the aroma of everything. Whereas guys who don't have seduction skills just have the food and just gobble it down. That's it. They just want to get straight to the food, right? There's no foreplay. There's no excitement. So a lot of guys are missing that sexual seduction skill because they're so desperate. They're so horny. They just want to get to the sex and that's it.
That's right. The word that comes to mind here is that a healthy containment. A bit like when it's like you've got this fire and it's like burning out of control. It's just damaging. And it affects things in negative ways. Whereas when you have it, you still have the fire, but you contain it in a healthy way. you have a healthy container for it. And that, I think, could be one way of thinking about maybe the antidote to this. Yeah, what do you think? How do you characterize this when it's working well? How would it look?
Yeah, so when the guy starts to integrate his fracture, so you've got the fractured man, then you've got the integrated man who's, taken all these fractures, and he's not perfect, but he'll integrate them. So he'll still have those wounds or still have those fractures. So a guy who's sexually integrated his fractures, a special sexual one, he won't be desperate. He'll have this amazing charismatic energy of, you know, I'm good with it, I'm good without it. I can take it or leave it. And he will know how to master his sexual energy. He'll know how to move his sexual energy into something more purposeful and meaningful. So the boy in us, right? The boy in us, he's ruled by his sexual energy, whereas the man rules his sexual energy. So he can tame his sexual energy. And that's one of the most, I would say, attractive thing for a man, especially when he goes on a date or even a date night, that he can really build that sexual energy, the tension, and he can act upon it intentionally. He's the director rather than he's at the mercy of it.
That's a great point. I love that, a sense of, yeah, being able to still function and not be like drooling and overly sort of needy.
like like a,
It's not the most
yeah.
attractive look, is it? When we just sort of lose our cool completely, and the woman's like feels that she's got you on a piece of string, for example, and doesn't maybe have the same spark.
Yeah, yeah, it's like a horny little teenager, right? Because she knows that if I can sexually manipulate you, then how many other women can sexually manipulate you? How many, if you can cave down to sexual desires, then you're going to cave down to any other woman that comes with sexual desires. So, what will you be willing to compromise? Your values, your virtues, So for her, a man who has sexual strength, she knows that, okay, he can sustain himself, and he can't be manipulated by sex. And that's a very powerful man. That's an
It's
incredibly
powerful.
powerful, yeah, because he can't be
Yeah,
manipulated.
definitely. I get that. No, we were watching Too Hot to Handle the other night, and there was a great example of this on the beach. It was like a date, and the guy was already in a kind of relationship with a woman, and there was a new entrant to the show that was trying to seduce
Okay.
him. And watching him just melt and crumble, it was like really not a great look. And it made you think, well, the woman is kind of attracted to him, but how long is this really going to last? Because she was pulling the strings, and you just wonder how that's going to play out, really.
Yeah, yes. It's it creates an untrustworthy man.
Yeah, it's a
Just
good point.
untrust is he's untrustworthy, by women, but also untrustworthy in a group of men. It's like, okay, well, he's high risk because he's got no deep roots and foundations.
That's right. That's right. It doesn't create great rapport either with, in male company or with your partner, does it? We come
Yeah.
across very ungrounded, really. So, no, that makes a lot of sense, Faisal. Let's go on to the fifth one. We've got one more to go.
Okay, so the fifth one is to complete the whole series is the spiritual fracture. So a spiritual fracture, he fears emptiness and he believes he's unnecessary. And so therefore he's constantly seeking for fulfillment. And a lot of guys will seek fulfillment in all the wrong places. Couple that with the ego fracture, who wants, validation, approval, attention. He's going to start to, spend money that he doesn't have, trying to impress, he's going to go broke trying to impress broke people. And he's going to look for a lot of fulfillment because he's empty inside in all the places that, the external world. And when
Makes
he's
sense.
looking for things
So,
in the,
yeah.
yeah,
So it's like a superficiality, would you say, Faisal, where we, rather than having deep rooted values and so on, we just find ourselves consumed with more superficial stuff. Is that right?
yeah, of course. Yeah, he's more at the, so both men and women at the spiritual fracture ones, they're both at quite a primal level. So that the primal level, they'll need to impress everybody. They'll start to get some sense of lack of belonging, meaningfulness as well. So they'll feel, empty inside. They'll lack passion. A guy who's really fractured won't have any aim. He'll feel aimless. Like, I feel lost. There's no purpose. There's no meaning to me. And it was quite. They did a test, or not a test, but they did some research about men who committed suicide, and when they wrote a suicide note, there was two common words that were used, and it all alluded to, like, I feel useless, meaningless, and I think that causes men a lot of pain, especially in relationships, especially now when women are quite strong in the workforce as well. They don't technically need a man to provide. And what the guy is doing is he's feeling, well, I feel useless. I'm not needed anymore. And a lot of the men's, sense of, I guess, masculinity, wellness is because they're needed, because they can fix problems, they can do something. So when men don't have direction, a purpose, I think there's an old quote: when a guy has no support or something like that, he burns down the village or something like that. So he needs a lot of help and support to build guidance and have a purpose.
So important. I think I completely agree on this, Faisal. I think we men don't get along well at all, when we don't have that purpose. And we can find it in all kinds of ways. I was just going to come back to my example from earlier from this seminar that I attended, where the guy on the stage with his wife was a stay-at-home dad, which might be the thing that really lights him up. He might absolutely love it, and it might be his thing, and he's on fire with it. However, judging by his demeanor and how things were going, my gut feeling is that may not be the case. Unfortunately, the guy talking to him didn't ask him about that, because it would have been quite interesting to understand, how did it come to be that you're at home in that role? And then you would have heard either something like, oh, this has been my dream, I always wanted to do this, and he would have been like really enthused by it, which would have given you one answer. And the other
Yeah.
would have been, well, it kind of seemed like the logical thing. I didn't really want to do it, but my wife kind of told me to, and I just got on with it. And that would have had a very
Yeah. And
different flavour. So yeah, this sense of, you can be doing the same thing and say there's nothing wrong with being a stay-at-home dad. I just want to emphasize for anyone listening, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with that. But what there may be wrong with is going along with something that you didn't really want to do. Because if we find
yes,
ourselves in that
yes.
role, then it probably plays out in all kinds of issues and challenges. And I think that's what I'm hearing in this fracture, Faisal.
Yeah. And, like, for example, I'm a full-time dad. I have two kids. One lives with mom. One lives, the older one decided, he wants to come and live with dad. And again, that was being a father. I mean, when you have these fractures, being a father is like 10x hard. So it can be a real challenge. And my biggest battle now is, it's not the relationships with women. It's not the attraction and dating things that, I got to a very competent stage with that. I'm really a competent stage with that. My real biggest challenge is now is as a dad, as a parent, because a lot of your fractures come out because the need to please them, the need to fix them, like the savior complex, the emotional fractures, like, I need to fix them, I need to make sure they're okay. And then you've got the nerve fracture, which then kicks in, which, you cave in with the boundary, okay, whatever happens, just let them go. So now it's like, you don't want to cave in, you want to uphold your boundary. You say it, mean it, hold it, and consistently do it, because I've got two boys, and two boys need that guidance. They need that support uh, more than. I mean, research says is that they need that guidance more than women do. They need to be initiated, and not just by dad, but also by other men as well.
Such an important point. I'm actually going to a men's event this weekend, which is a kind of gathering, initiation, sort of combined together. I just think it's so important. That probably a theme of a future conversation, the importance of men being initiated correctly. And I've heard it written. I think it's an interesting point that men can't get initiated really by women, like by their mum. They've got to be in
Yes.
contact with other men, which could include their dad, but ideally would include other healthy, positive male role models to launch them into that phase of their lives. So it's such an important point. And yeah, hopefully that's of service to all the fathers out there listening, thinking, yeah, how can I provide that sort of example for my kids and give them that support that that they may
Yeah,
need.
abs- absolutely. I mean, the women, like the boy's mum, she's a great nurturer. She's really good at nurturing. Whereas the boys, because women have different instincts and men have different instincts, and those instincts that the boys can relate to the instinct I have as a man, and mom doesn't always have that. I mean, like my boys, I remember they wanted guns and fights and things like that. And the mom's like, no, you don't want that. And I'm like, yeah, they do, because I want that. I love guns, fast cars. I like all of these things. Completely opposite to what her nervous system wants. Her nervous system wants safety, playful. Doesn't want competitiveness. Doesn't want all of these things. Wants all of those. Everybody get on together, and it's like, no, we need to compete. We need to have metrics. We need to do that. So there was a lot of instinctive stuff that us boys we wanted, and it was very against the feminine nature or mother nature. And I think this is where it can be very difficult for men to really get that, grasp that. And also, uh, when it comes to masculinity bestows masculinity. You need other masculine men to teach you about masculinity. And one of the things that men have is they're uncomfortable around other strong masculine men. And no woman can teach you to be comfortable around strong men. The only way to do that is to be around those men.
That's right, correct. Completely agree. Such an important point, and yeah, great way to finish to link back into parenting, which is again for many of us such a big part of our journey, part of our service to the world, isn't it? So important. Yeah, I've really enjoyed this conversation, Faisal. I've loved these areas we've talked about. Thanks for being so open as well with your own experience. Really appreciated that too. How can people stay in touch with you?
Yeah, they can just go to www.fivefractures.com. I've got an online quiz. They can fill in a free quiz to find out how fractured they are as a man. So it's very catered for men. I think I will probably develop some more quizzes and assessments later on as well. So, but fivefractures.com.
Fantastic, and we'll include that link in the notes of the podcast as well if you're listening on there, so you can pick that up. And yeah, I'd really encourage anyone that's been intrigued by this conversation and found points of resonance. Maybe you've been listening to the five fractures and thinking which one is my main one or which combination applied to me. So the quiz sounds like a really great starting point, and I'd really encourage everyone to check that out and make sure you follow Faisal on social media. I guess your links to socials are on there as well, Faisal.
Yes, they are. Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
Fantastic.
I really
So,
enjoyed the conversation and the questions as well. So I really appreciate it.
me too. Likewise. Well, give us a final call to action, Faisal. What for men listening? What would you say to them when maybe people are at that point of realizing that there are some of these fractures that are affecting them? Give us a final call to action. Why is this stuff so important?
Well, if you don't heal something, right, it'll just still. It's like a pebble in imagine a pebble in your shoe, right? And you can't walk around life with a pebble in your shoe, because if you walk around like that, it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be there. You need to do something about it. So until you take it out, you're going to walk around. It's going to be discomfort, and you're going to take that out on your family, your kids, your loved ones. So really work on that. And the one thing I would say is get support, get help. You know, there are so many great places you can get help. And for men, the first place I would say is join a men's group. There's so many men's groups out there. Join one of them and get some support, get some guidance.
100%. Completely echo all of that, Faisal. And yeah, thanks again for joining me today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, keep well and keep in touch.
Thank you, Matt. Take care.